Hello and welcome to Indie Book Magic, a podcast that connects geek readers and writers in an open, lighthearted, and occasionally random environment. We're your friendly hosts, Janeen Ippolito and H.L. Burke.
Hello.
Hey.
Good morning or afternoon.
Good morning.
Good morning, afternoon, good evening, good night.
This is what happens when the podcasters live on opposite sides of the country.
Exactly. And we have no idea what time this person will be listening to this either. So just best to cover all bases.
That's true. You could be listening to this at like midnight or 3 a.m. or anytime you want to. We won't judge because you're listening, and that's great.
Yes.
So today we have one of our first variety episodes for you. These episodes are going to, cover geeky news, maybe Q&A from you, our wonderful listeners, and maybe anything else that comes into our heads. We welcome ideas. We don't guarantee we'll use them, but we welcome them. So if you have any ideas for future variety episodes like this, go ahead and throw them down on our Facebook page, or you can tweet them to us at Indie Book Magic Podcast. Our episode today is weird and wacky world building, because we both love world building, and it's a great opportunity to just have loads and loads of fun. So start us off, Heidi.
Okay. Well, Janeen, as you know, we both like to write fantasy and sci-fi. So you have to do a lot of research in that. And a lot of times what you're going to be building off of is existing mythology. Because I think it helps if you have that little grasp of the familiar, that story that people know before you take off into crazy, which I love crazy as much as the next person, but it helps to have that little tether of a thread holding you to reality. Especially when you're
grounded and everything. Yeah.
So a lot of times that we'll take something that's been maybe done to death, like I would take fairies, and you have your vampires.
Yes.
And we take them and we tweak them and put our little neat spin on them. But it's fun to just know where you're coming from instead of just making a creature up totally and just slapping the name fairy on it and saying that's good. So I spent a lot of time for Spellsmith and Carver, and a couple of my other series involve fairy worlds or fey lands. And it was fun to research what plants that fairies were apparently attracted to or adverse to. And a lot of sites didn't disagree. So I just kind of picked my favorites and stuck with that. Yeah. Different fey creatures have different weaknesses. And sometimes it's interesting, why are those supposed weaknesses? It just seems so weird, but if you take them and you run with them like with your vampires,
Yeah, and it's really fun to have those different angles and strengths and weaknesses. I know with vampires, I did a ton of mythology, trying to research them with a series that I worked on with Julia Busco that is actually now in overhaul. So normally I would name drop it and be like, look at it, but right now it's an overhaul, so you can't get it online. Sorry guys, it's going to come out in the future again, even better. But as part of this, we did a lot of research into vampire lore. And the weirdest thing I found, and that Julia found, was that one way to stop a vampire was to drop a bag of rice on the ground, because they would be consumed with counting each and every grain of rice. And I thought, that is the most random thing to use. I must chase this. Why do we not have vampire movies with people stopping vampires by just, grabbing a 5-pound bag of rice and sprinkling it across the street? Because I have a quirky sense of humor, that sounds like a great thing to add to a horror story. So that's actually inspired us with the idea that some vampires could be OCD, because it kind of connected to the whole reason why they'd want to count every grain of rice. And I know with your upcoming book, Spicebringer, you had to do some research into some Indian cultures.
Yeah, and I didn't want to totally just rip off India, but with the setting being about the spice road and the spice trade, it made sense to go into that area of the world. And you find out they had such cool stuff that you wouldn't think about it, because we don't learn that part of our history as well as we learn, say, the European history that maybe our particular ancestors came from. And they have things they had Indian martial arts, which is something I always associated with Japan and China. But I never really thought to look into India. And India has some of the oldest martial arts systems or forms in the world. And they're beautiful. They're dance-like. They have different ones with different weapons like swords and staves. Mm-hmm. And just spending some time watching videos of that online and reading up on it. And there's it's actually a fairly traditional art form for females too. I think there's a 80 or 90-year-old woman in India who's bringing back female swordsmanship.
Yeah,
that's what she does.
Yeah, there's some YouTube videos on that. Yeah.
It's really interesting. If you get the time to watch it, it's kind of like watching figure skating at the Olympics. It's just that sense of wonder of what people can do controlling their bodies and stuff. And it's just really cool to bring that to put some things somebody may not experience into a book and just show how beautiful and wonderful it can be,
Yeah, and I think that appreciation factor is so important when using those different elements. Coming into it from a sense of like wonder and humility and wanting to appreciate those elements of those various mythologies and cultural aspects and do it in a respectful way is totally fine, and something that can be a great way of really connecting with other people around the world, which is always a fun thing to do. Something else that you can actually do in terms of connecting with someone else's experience is using an existing condition that they have. And I actually will do this with a story that I'm partly written and it's going to be coming out in the next year or two. And it was inspired by a woman who had a hallucinatory condition where she saw people as dragons, and she would also just see dragons by themselves. And I
sounds like my day-to-day life.
But the interesting thing is, again, like, maybe Heidi would think, oh, this sounds great, like I could see all these dragons everywhere. But they weren't nice dragons. Like, they were these scary, monstrous faces a lot of times. So it was really a pretty difficult condition for her to deal with. And I was fascinated by that. And so when I was looking at adapting The Princess and the Frog into a story, I kind of use fairy tales, the very loose basis for stories that are very not fairy tale like. So if you're going to look online, you'll say, wow, she writes steampunk and she doesn't mention that she uses fairy tales as basis. I transform them a lot, so you'll never know. But but with this one, I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting with The Princess and the Frog? We usually think, well, she has to kiss the frog or something. But what if she only saw someone who looks like a frog because she had the condition where she saw everyone like that? And so this actual pretty terrible hallucinatory condition this woman had that was since dealt with medication, I was able to kind of turn that into real nuisance for a character in a story. Other things have done this in, again, really interesting, respectful ways. On the Percy Jackson series, where the kids there have ADHD, but it's because of their halfling blood. That's always really interesting. They're half god, and that's why they have ADHD, because they're meant for battle combatness. And do you have any other thoughts, Heidi?
Well, there's like the Tethered World series by Heather L. Fitzgerald. I believe that she has an autistic son, so she has experience in that. And it helps if you have that personal connection to it, because then you're trying to represent well. But she uses autism in her stories as having major characters. And I think that's important, is if you have that connection and you're willing to reach out to people, if you don't, to find out about it, as opposed to just treating them as something you can use and exploit, which is and something that I think a lot of authors get into lazy. If you're being lazy about it, you don't want to be lazy,
Yeah. At the same time, I go for it. I always tell people, because I have a lot of different experiences with people very close to me who have various mental health issues and things like that. And I say, tell people, if you want to include this in books, do include it. Do expect that you'll find reviewers who will say you're doing it wrong because what you're experiencing that you're writing about is different from their experience. But also make sure you do your research and make those contacts with yourself so that you're getting it right. That's just an important thing to do.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to include people who are differently able just because you're afraid someone's going to bite your head off for it. I think that was with me. I've had my first experience with this was dealing with my character in Beggar Magic, Brick, who is deaf. And the first person I got who I asked for help from this was somebody I just met through an online writers group. She was not helpful at all. She just wanted to bite my head off for even trying. But instead of giving up, I sought out somebody who was actually willing to give me input and was able to fix some things that I was admittedly doing wrong, that I didn't know I was doing wrong. But because the first person responded to me in anger, I wasn't able to get anything that helpful out of it, except she was just basically telling me to stop. And if you never include people who don't have the same experiences of you because you're afraid to mess it up, your worlds are going to suffer for it. They're not going to be as rich. So you do have to take a risk, and you do have to weather the criticism that you will inevitably get, but it's worth it,
Very much so, very much so. And the thing is, if people who come to your stories and have this kind of reviews are often people who maybe have had some kind of pain or hurtful experience in their own life, and so they may be projecting that on you. They may be feeling very real emotions that have nothing to do with your book, and so you just go in there realizing that this could happen, but still go ahead and do it anyway, because it is very worthwhile, and it can be a really great way to develop empathy if you do it in a respectful and thoroughly researched way.
Yeah, and for every person who that isn't their experience, there will be somebody who, if you did, not just make it up off the top of your head and say do research, if you use some real experience through that, it will represent somebody, and that person is your audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so, very much so. Now, going away from this more of a heavy topic and going to something lighter, I think Heidi wants to tell us about some octopi.
I just love octopi, but octopi is not correct.
Ooh,
It's
that's
octopuses
right.
or octopodes might be correct, but nobody says that because it's a fake Latin cognate. And is that a word? It's not. All right. Anyway, so but octopus is a Greek-based word, and octopi would be a Latin plural. So that doesn't make sense.
No,
so
that makes sense.
I like the word octopi, though. It's just fun to say because then you think of the Rhett and Link Bullet Pie episode where they actually did an octopi. That was awful.
Yeah, but you just kind of show me up here as a former English teacher. I'm like, oh, that's right. But I just love the way the octopi sounds. So I'm kind of hoping if I just keep using it, maybe I'll just change the culture.
It's one of those words that has been used enough that is accepted, even though it was not originally correct. That happens because English evolves. But I love things that are fake or funny or just a little goofy. I mean, I like to read things like I'll read The Onion or the Babylon Bee or Satire.
Good stuff there.
Aware that they're not real. And sometimes the funniness is just because it's not real. It's just put something ridiculous into the world. Like I think one of the first April Fool's jokes was Benjamin Franklin wanted to prove that the Europeans and English didn't really know much about the U.S. So he put this article out about whales spawning by jumping up Niagara Falls. But yeah, and with the age of the internet, there is so much misinformation going around that you can either get mad at it or you can harness it for creative activity.
Use it for you. Use it for you. Yep. Make it work.
One of the earliest is like the Pacific tree octopuses. If you look up Pacific tree octopus on the web, you will find that somebody made a website devoted to the Pacific tree octopus, which is this small octopus who lives in the forest of the Olympic rainforest and lives in trees and has at one point been harvested by people who wanted to use it to decorate hats. And just the website is so well put together and looks so real that it's fooled like fourth grade students into accidentally writing book reports on it or animal reports on it. And it's used in internet literacy just to show you that this isn't real. But because of that, I just always love that aspect of you could fool somebody with that. So I do have a short story which is out now called Absolutely True Facts About the Pacific Tree Octopus, about a young girl who does go out of her way to prove that they exist. Because of course, in my world, they do.
Of course.
Yeah, you just embrace I love ridiculous. I love something that just takes something and then it's like, but of course, then in this world, everybody walks in their hands and stuff, or just one random off the wall thing in an otherwise maybe grounded world.
Yeah, and taking things and kind of flipping them around. Actually, taking the crazy things seriously. I mean, I think that's part of the fun of writing speculative fiction is that you can take the things that everyone calls crazy or silly in a serious light and throw them into a completely different angle. And that's always fun.
Yeah, and also in Spycebringer, the whole thing I got from Spycebringer is I was watching a internet video about why salt and pepper are the primary. That's what you find on tables on restaurants, right? Why isn't it salt and paprika? Why isn't it salt or cayenne? It's salt and black pepper. And salt has a long and varied tradition that is very interesting, but black pepper is kind of this weird little spice. But why is that popular? And during the course of it, they said that one of the things that spice merchants would do to raise the value of black pepper was to tell people that it was harvested from groves guarded by fire-breathing serpents. And just that concept was the whole point of Spycebringer, came out of just thinking about those amazing serpents that must be guarding this spice, this precious black pepper spice,
Yeah, and that's really fun. So that's definitely a different angle to take it. And again, taking what you have or what existed and kind of giving it a bit of a tweak. Some ways that you can do this, we actually can see in movies, such as the very famous and wonderful Porgs.
Oh, I love Porgs.
we at Indie Book Magic are a Porg positive podcast. So if you have like major issues with Porgs or cat dragons, it may not be the podcast for you, but we do love our Porgs. One of the reasons I actually really fell in love with Porgs, I thought they were really cute before because I'm friends with Heidi and I saw them constantly for about 3 months before the movie came out. But what really caught me is when I found an article about how they were created. And they were created because the island that Luke was on is out somewhere in like the North Atlantic or something. It was populated by puffins, and I love puffins. They're like one of my favorite birds of all time. And they held these puffins. They couldn't really kick them off the island because it was a puffin sanctuary area. They were protected species. So unfortunately, they couldn't get rid of all these birds who were going all over the film equipment and all over the island. And trying to get rid of them with CGI would have taken forever. So instead, they turned all the puffins into porgs. And I thought this was pretty much the most fantastic way of taking lemons and making lemonade, as it were. And after that, I was like, okay, I am now completely like a huge fan of porgs. And then I actually saw the movie and I saw like the way the porgs moved, and I'm like, wow, those look like they turned a puffin and made it into a little awesome furry creature of cuteness. And this just makes me happy. So sometimes you have to take things that, you know, you didn't plan on and turn them into something cool.
It is just a fun word to say too, puffin.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, puffins as it is are pretty fantastic, quirky birds who kind of just strut around really weird. And so, like, when I saw the porgs, I'm like, they're even walking like puffins. This is just, life is good right now.
So apparently they're mildly tasty too.
Well, you know, if you need to eat, you need to eat. And something else that you can do with that, and one thing we could actually want to throw down maybe for you guys listening in the audience there, you writers, there are trees in an island, I think it's off the coast of Yemen, and they bleed. Like, not really, but their sap is a really deep, rich blood red. And when I used to teach basic botany to my students in the classroom, I would show them this because they're like, oh, it's bleeding, that's gross. I'm like, it's not real blood, it's just the sap. But of course, the locals, like the natives, really thought because of the color of it that it was really powerful. So they used a native medicine, and scientific research has proven that it actually is really useful as a healing agent, like many plants can be. So there you go, guys. Out there in writer land, go ahead and put a bleeding tree in your stories. And for extra fun, don't make it a horror story, because like using a bleeding tree in a horror story, I mean, we expect that. That's happened. Try to see if you can use a bleeding tree in some other way. Like maybe, you know, it's a living tree and like someone doesn't know it and something tries to carve a name in it. It comes alive and gives them a lecture, something like that. Do something a little more quirky than just going for a horror story, because that's kind of obvious.
It slaps.
So that's definitely.
Branch. It's a really sassy voice.
Yes. Yeah, it's kind of like an ant or those trees in like the Wizard of Oz, you know, that threw apples at them as they waxed. In the movie, I'm not sure. I think they were in the book, but I've only seen the movie, unfortunately.
It's been a while since I read the book.
Yeah. So that's definitely another angle that you can go with those things. Of course, you know, you could also just, you know, take something you absolutely, completely enjoy, which I'm sure Heidi knows nothing about, taking something you just can't get enough of and putting it into a story.
I know. If I get stuck, there is a certain mythical creature which I just will pop in to a story at random, and it automatically makes everything better. And that is the beloved, majestic, amazing dragon. Because if you're lost in a world and you're feeling alone, you call that dragon and he comes down and he makes everything 10 times more awesome. It's like a mathematical equation. Story plus dragon equals 10 times awesome.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, if you're looking for like your brand or something, if you like things, just keep putting them in there. Your readers will find you. I mean, I love reading dragons. I look for books that have a dragon in them and I go, oh, look, it's a dragon. I will automatically pick up that book because I like to read books about dragons.
I've gotten to the point where if I can't fit one in really, I'll try to like sneak one in another way. Like I think I put one in as a topiary, like a hedge trimming, you know, those shaped hedges in Nissa glass. Because it didn't really make sense to have a dragon in that steampunk world. But I really wanted one anyway, if only just to mention really quick. It's a good luck charm, you know?
Yeah, that's kind of like because you gotta, there it's gonna go, and there it will stay, and there it will be. So that's another angle you can do. And then here's something a bit different. You could take something traditional that everyone expects and put it in a new environment. So axe throwing. Listeners out there, you may have done some axe throwing. It's, you know, you take an axe and you throw it at something. I'm sure it's much more complicated than that, but I have not done it personally. Although the idea sounds fantastic, but that's because I like sharp and pointy objects. Anyway, you know, you expect to find that someplace in Wisconsin. You don't expect to find that in New York City. However, there is a establishment in New York City that has opened their doors and allowed people to take up axes and throw them at an axe throwing range.
Yeah. And I believe they have experts on hand so that they're not like, I'm hoping they aren't going to kill somebody this way.
Yeah, I think there is some training involved because it is interesting. I mean, this is a bar as well as, an axe throwing range. And something for me, the combination of alcohol and axes makes me a little nervous, but they have people, there that are trained and everything.
Yeah, because what
And
could go wrong?
I can't even imagine what would go wrong. But yeah, they have people who are trained for intervention procedures. So apparently they're trained to know how to responsibly serve and sell and consume alcohol, which is definitely a good idea with this kind of thing. But it's taking off. And I mean, I can imagine at the end of a long day, it can be a good stress reliever. You just go there and throw an axe.
And there's something to be said by just walking into something and finding something unexpected. That's what I found out when we lived in Japan temporarily. They would have a lot of store cats.
Mm-hmm.
And just from living in the States, I did not expect store cats. But every time I walked into a store and there was a store cat, I got really excited. I'm like, this cat works here.
Yeah, you do see that in the US though, because I've walked into places and they have like an animal or something that just kind of, stares at you as you walk around. Like I've been to an art store and they have a dog. And I mean, I think they check to make sure that you're not scared of the dog. But the dog's very nice, very placid, and it's just the store dog, and you go in and see it.
Yeah, it's more common in mom and pops, I think, which
Mm-hmm.
like as opposed to like big places. But yeah, it's just always something that you don't expect. And when you come across something you don't necessarily expect, it takes your brain a moment to adjust, and then usually you get happy about it,
Yeah, so it's just a great way to kind of make your readers happy by giving them something quirky that's like, oh, that happens. Speaking of doing something that, just it's a little bit unexpected, Heidi's got a new way for us to take winter seriously. You know, the Game of Thrones tagline, winter is coming. Well, in this case, when winter is coming, what's happening, Heidi?
Iguanas are falling from the trees in Florida.
See, now, why didn't George R. R. Martin put that in his books?
I know. It just would have made so much better. I actually have not read those books, but I am assuming just from what I know about them that if iguanas were falling from the trees, it would be much more tempting for me to read them.
I have to admit,
Because
I would definitely be like blazing through that just to read that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, cold-blooded creatures. Like the other day I went outside and I thought I found a dead frog in my backyard, and I picked it up and I brought it inside because I realized it wasn't dead. It was just very, very sleepy because we got a little colder here than usual, and it started coming alive, and then it was very active. I had to put it out really quick. But this Florida, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, they had a flash freeze, and the iguanas would be up in the trees, they would freeze, and they would fall like stiff as a board down to the ground, and then people would think they were dead, but they would warm up as the sun came out, and you would see the people like they'd fall into the middle of the street, and there were these people carrying these like 4-foot iguanas by the tail, getting them out of the street so that they wouldn't get run over. Well, it's just like you're walking through a forest, imagine, and all of a sudden these iguanas start raining from the trees. There's so much you could do with that. Other weird things that have happened in the world, like fish rain. That is awesome. It's raining fish. And you take that and you put it into your world. And there is that moment of suspended disbelief, but if anyone Googles that, they will find you are not just making it up.
Although again, if it's your story, you could just make it up because it's your story, and that's what you can do. Now, finally, we've had all these different ways of using wacky world building and stories for the fun of it. But the last one, and one of the best reasons, is just because you can. And that brings us to our final example for this show, and that is making a knife from a dried fish.
Well, I believe it's a bonito.
Because apparently the dried bonito is the hardest food in the world. And so this enterprising person decided that they were going to turn the dried bonito, the hardest food in the world, into a working, very sharp knife.
Yeah. So, well, bonito I had this in Japan when we lived there. They like to put fish flakes on things, kind of like almost like a salt or a condiment. They would like dry and preserve it hard. And this guy he went all out and like layered a bunch of hard, like it almost becomes like a fish lollipop. It's like that hard. He took it and then he sharpened it and he made a fish you can stab people with. I do not know if you can cut down the tallest tree in the forest of it, though. That is the burning question.
True, that's true. And then we have to figure out if you can somehow do it with herrings,
Exactly.
And then you figure it to go. Absolutely. But yeah, so the next time, if someone asks for a fish knife, instead of handing them, a certain kind of serrated knife, you could try to hand them an actual fish knife and see how that happens with them. Right, Heidi?
Yeah, and you could use it like a character who is island that doesn't allow weapons, and because they're all pacifists, and then he decides he really wants a fish knife.
Which is actually interesting. Tying back into the idea of martial arts, there were some martial arts forms that came about because they were not allowed to have weapons in some places. So they learned how to take whatever they could and make it into weapons. So you could use that and take these, knives made out of fish and turn it into something for your story like that.
Oh, yeah. And so many things come out of convenience because I think, Janeen, you get that human nature that if you want to and you really are determined, there's very little that can stop a determined human being.
Which can be a good thing and a bad thing. But
exactly.
and definitely lead to some very interesting things happening. But you know what? Creativity is good. It's great in world building. It's great in stories. We love to read about it. We love to write it. We love you listeners out there to, with this podcast episode, throw down in a comments or something, a really wacky bit of world building that you've seen out there, like either in a book or something in the real world that you're like, wow, this should be in a book, or this is going to be in my book, or I read this in a book, or etc. Go ahead and let us know about that, because we love getting to see these things and laugh about them and enjoy them and just celebrate everything.
Oh yeah, because there is a lot out there to explore.
Speaking of lots more coming, we have an exciting, awesome, super duper interview episode coming up next with a super awesome, mysterious guest that you will find out about. And we're really excited. Much mystery, much amaze, much all the things.
I hope we get to announce it so that you're not totally surprised. But
yes, we probably will announce it in the near future. So watch our Facebook page, watch Twitter, watch all those things. Just follow us, just stalk us, and then you're good.
Yeah, or we could just like have her or him on, and then not tell you who she is, or he,
or them.
You'll have to guess.
Yes, definitely so. And also, go ahead, feel free to share this podcast with friends, family, anything. And as well, we are going to be on iTunes. So find us on iTunes and give us some happy reviews. Let us know what you think and all of those things. Give us some Porg love and cat dragon love out there. Thank you so much for showing up.
Yes, thank you for coming again. This was a lot of fun, and we brought the Porgs.
Yes. Have a good day.